Today, you're going to learn how to tell if your company's values actually mean something and the simple steps that transform words on a wall into behaviors that people actually trust. So, stay till the end for 5 actions you can use this week. Please follow us at The Advisor with Stacey Chalami on Apple, Spotify, and subscribe at YouTube. I just want to send a quick shout out to Dr. Bradley Nelson and iHeartRadio for your sponsorship. And to our audience and our fans, please do not forget to hit that like and subscribe button. My guest today is David Cohen. He is a businessman and founder of DS Cohen and Associates and has a vast portfolio of experience in what we're talking about today. So, David, welcome back. I'd love to jump right in.
Let's
Let's
do
start
that.
simple. How do you know if a company's values actually mean something or if they're just essentially decorations on the wall?
That's a real just jumping right into it.
I said, let's jump in.
uh, the easiest way is to see how decisions are made in tough
Mm,
times. When a decision, when there's a decision and they have to make a choice between, let's say, doing something which is out of their strategy or doing something which might make them money or versus contradicts their values or contradicts their purpose, then you know they're just wall decor. If
mm,
they say, I'm going to pass on that, and while it might make me money or it might do something that is positive for the organization, then you have a situation where you know they're going to live their values because they're going to pass. So the easiest test is to see how do they make decisions and what happens to people who make the wrong decision, one that contradicts the values. How do senior leaders treat them, especially somebody who contradicts the values in their decision and winds up making them some money, a lot of money, and then they get rewarded, and then they send a message to the entire organization. The values are, nice to have, they're aspirational, they're on the wall, but Machiavelli is still around and do whatever you want.
right, right. Well, I guess then what is the biggest misunderstanding leaders have about defining what values are?
Well, that's a good question because I have my definition of values, which I've worked with for the last 30 plus years. And values are strongly held beliefs that are emotionally charged, resistant to change, and universally applied. So
Mm,
they're the same for everybody. So I always find it interesting that in organizations, when they put together these behavioral profiles, that for the values, they have different behaviors at different levels of the organization. Because if a value is universal, the behavior is universal. It's got to be the
right.
same for the intern that just started, the employees worked there for 30 years, or any member of the C-suite. They all have to behave according to the values exactly the same. So I think that that is an issue that people try to differentiate them for different employees, when in fact, if they're universal, they have to be the same for everybody.
Yeah, if one person starts acting differently and gets away with it, that sends a message. That has like a loud message.
No, it does. And well, I look at it that you know, there's those people in the organization, which I call those that live the values and get the results done. Those are usually the stars of the organization.
Mm,
Those who don't live the values and don't get any work, I call those deadwood. Those who live the values but are struggling with work, those are keepers. A lot of organizations don't see it that way because when you let somebody that really lives the values, is really enthusiastic, and other people look to for advice and guidance on how to behave in the organization, find an area where their skill and knowledge or upskill their skill and knowledge to become stars. Because if you let them go, the message is you can let anybody go.
right.
Then there's those who get great results, but as you just said, they don't live the values, they violate the values, but they get rewarded. And I call those viruses because every
Mhm.
time they get rewarded, there's a message being sent by senior leadership that they can act that way also and get away with it and be rewarded for it. So don't worry about it. And
Mhm.
it's really, I've seen, for instance, many years ago, I was working with a brokerage house, stockbroker house, and they had one gentleman in one of their locations who was the area manager, and he violated the values, whatever he called the back office. And then he treated them very poorly. He would threaten to fire them if they didn't cooperate with him. And he always got rewarded because he was one of the top producers in the organization. And when the new head of human resources came in and we worked on the values, we talked to the CEO and said, if he wants these to take hold and not be, considered as, nice to have, but nobody's going to live them, that next time this person behaves this way, he has to let them go. And
Mm.
he was concerned because he was a big producer, et cetera, et cetera. And my approach was he's dealing with the people who are buying your stock, is working with your company, and probably treating them the same way. And so let him go. And they let him go. And to the CEO's surprise, the person they put in who actually led the values, a younger gentleman, he actually increased the book of business and found out that some of the people who this gentleman was working with before he was let go, they liked him because he always produced good money, but they
Right.
reinvested the money in other places. So
Wow.
now they trusted this new person and were reinvesting in theirs. And every time I've seen this over and over again, where that virus was let go, business improved, morale improved. I was dealing with a hotel chain once, and the head of marketing was violating the values. And I said, we said can't continue working with the organization and put these values forward if, in fact, he's going to be allowed to get away with it. And the CEO said, well, he's doing a great job. He's turning our business around. We're getting higher occupancy rates. I said, well, then call me when you decide that you can't tolerate it anymore. And he
Right.
called me and he said 6 months later, and he let him go. And to his surprise, 2 days later, two of the very senior marketing people who had been doing most of the work to make this guy look good, it came in his office and said they had their letters of resignation prepared. They were looking for other jobs, but now that this guy's gone, they'll stick around. So they
Wow.
continue to increase occupancy. So it's a very interesting thing. And there's so many stories. On the other hand, I've run into CEOs who say, well, they're nice to have, but they're aspirational. And I said,
Well,
once you
okay.
state them, you can't say they're aspirational.
Right.
I mean, but he had one executive that was not living the values, and that was trickling down through the organization. That person's division were treating people in other divisions who were living the values, not according to what everybody expected. So there was a real tension in the environment. And we had this discussion for about half hour. And at the end, his conclusion was, we're just going to have to agree to disagree, and you're not working here anymore. And I said,
Wow.
that's fine. And he lost his key HR people also with about 3 months, who said they put a lot of time and effort into developing the values correctly, and they were historically rooted in the organization, and that if he wasn't going to live them and support people and hold people accountable, they couldn't be part of the organization. So
Yeah.
it was very
Yeah.
interesting.
People really start to resent the people who aren't following the values, especially if they're driven into you. And then if you're following them and there's key people who aren't and they're getting away with it, people silently resent them. And then it makes them feel like confused. It sounds like we're talking about this confusing message. Can you give us what does a real value look like in action versus a hollow one that sounds nice but really does nothing?
Well, I was working with um, a company, I can't use their name, but one of their values was the quality of people.
Okay.
And their whole issue about respect and dignity for the people who work there. And they always did things which were very positive for the people. And one day, this new employee, been there about 6 months. It was in Halifax. No, it was in a small town in Nova Scotia. And this is a multinational company. I mean, a large multinational company. And he had a child who the hospital in Halifax was going to send to sick kids in Toronto. Well, they only pay for one parent to go, and they give a very small stipend for living. And the cost of living in Toronto is a little bit higher than it is in Halifax. So
Right. Yeah.
it didn't quite jive. And one day the plant manager comes down to the break room where he was with his team, and he said, "Are you going with your wife and child to Toronto tomorrow?" And he said, "No, I have to work. I mean, I just started working here. My coworkers give me some of their days off so I can be in the hospital, but I got to be here because we got to pay bills."
Right.
And he looked at him and handed him an envelope, which gave him a round trip ticket for the same flight his wife and child were on to Toronto,
Wow.
and a letter for one of the hotels near the hospital that said that the company would pay for everything that cost him in the hospital while he was in the hospital, while his child was there, for the hotel, meals, room, everything.
Wow.
He said, "That's really nice, but I got to get my money paid." And he looked at him and says, "Your job assignment until further notice is to be with your wife and kids. We'll deposit your check every 2 weeks because that's your job assignment." Now, that's a nice story. He came back, worked 17 years, never missed a day of work. All right.
Wow.
He was involved with everything. Now, fast forward 20 something years after that, the North America head of learning and development's wife gets very ill, and she gets transferred to a hospital away from their home. Now, the North American head has to be in Europe at the head office approximately every 3 weeks for international meetings and other stuff that goes on. And because he's on the leadership team, and they did the same thing for him. They set up a hotel room for him in the town his wife was in. They set up a telecommunication system so he could attend the meetings in Europe virtually, and this is long before COVID. And he also very rarely was back in the head office during that period of time because his job assignment was to be there. So that's why I mean universally apply. I had another situation with a auto parts manufacturer outside of Dearborn where we just finished the values actually, and it was about again, along the lines of dignity and respect. And I get a phone call from the CEO who says, our health insurance policy doesn't kick in until the person's been here for 90 days. And
Mm.
just found out this new support person, yeah, administrative assistant, has stage 3 cancer, but she has no insurance. But because she's not been here 90 days. She said, he says to me, what should I do? I said, well, you guys created the values and what they mean. You tell me. And I could
Yeah.
kind of hear him smile on the phone and says, I thought you'd say that. They
Yeah.
paid nearly, I would say, over $500,000 out of pocket for her hospital care.
Wow.
Nobody knew. They didn't advertise it. They didn't say anything about it. And it's a rather large organization that's head offices in Europe and they're in Asia and they're one of the top automatic manufacturers of their product. Somehow the whole organization knew about it, even though they never said anything. And it generated a lot of positive feelings about they really mean it. They just put these values out. It was an organization that just came together with three different organizations to create a new organization. And they really mean their values. The employees were proud. People were, there was a lot of positive energy in the environment. So when you go out of your way and you live your values and you maintain your values, the organization is going to be successful. And the research shows those organizations, from a profit point of view, always outperform their competitors. And
Right.
it's a logical conclusion.
So you say that values must be observable. So how does someone spot a value being lived out in real time? I know you just gave us some great examples, but what are some more subtle examples of that?
Well, some of those examples are the way I call it sort of the hidden curriculum in schools. There's a hidden curriculum, a hidden playbook within organizations. And it's those little things that you think aren't necessarily observed, but people pay attention to. It's, do people call each other by name?
Okay.
Do people acknowledge each other's existence? Do they offer help or assistance? It depends on the values, because
Right.
if you see those subtle things happening in the organization, you know that they're lived. And one of the things I always say to my clients is, in order to understand the behavior is authentic to the organization's DNA, is find what I call corporate legends. The corporate legends are those rare times under difficult situations where somebody lives the values.
Mm,
And those legends get passed on from employee generation to the next generation and reinforce the values. So celebrate those legends. They're out there. And in some organizations, what they do is they go out and they look for them. They say, listen, where have been examples that you're really proud of yourself or somebody else who did this, even though it wasn't necessarily top of mind or the easiest thing to do, but really exemplified us living the values. And it's interesting to see what comes up.
yeah. Do you recall a moment where lived values shifted a team or changed a business outcome?
Well, I don't think, it's interesting. The live values are ingrained in the organization if they're values. So
Okay.
if you belong to the organization and you live by the values, they're not going to change necessarily. But one of my favorite stories is at Starbucks is Howard Schultz made a decision to offer same-sex partners healthcare.
Right.
And at the next annual meeting, he got attacked by a shareholder that said that his responsibility is to the shareholders and that this is a political statement. And he goes on and on. And with a great deal of civility, Howard Schultz answers him and says, basically, our share value has gone up 34% this year. If you can find a better deal somewhere else, please take your money and invest it there. That this is an important part of expressing who we are and what we believe in, because for him, the whole concept of human dignity was, I'm going to help people maintain that dignity. I'm going to do what I can. And giving same-sex partners or giving partners health insurance made a whole lot of sense from a business perspective, because their share value kept going up. People
Right.
wanted to work there. So it changes when you live your values and take action on them, especially perhaps when, like in that case, it's out of the ordinary. But yet he gets attacked by, um, oh, what's his name? The Canadian, Mr. Wonderful. What's his name?
Mm,
On Shark Tank. Um, he gets attacked by him on a CBC program saying that Schultz is wrong that his responsibility is solely to the shareholders. And when that was played for him, and he heard that, Schultz's response, he's dead wrong. And that goes along with my philosophy that profit is the byproduct of doing business correctly.
Right.
And if you live your values and you know that you've got a good business and that it's working well, and you continue to live your values, even though, yeah, he could have put more money in the shareholder's pocket, but that wasn't going to maintain the dignity of his employees. But by maintaining the dignity of his employees, he took care of his employees, who in turn took care of the customer. And that is going right down to the baristas.
Right.
So when I was teaching a course at Durham College many years ago on organizational behavior, and we were talking about values, I asked my students to go ask a barista at Starbucks what their values were and how that impacted the way they did work. And I asked
Mm.
them to go to that other coffee shop in Canada, Tim Hortons, and ask the, the counter person there what their values were. And I did this 5 years in a row. And not once did anybody at Tim Hortons know the values. At Starbucks, they not only knew the values, but even if it was busy, somebody else would come over, take work or whatever they were doing, and let them talk to one of my students. The student's concern was Starbucks coffee costs a lot more than Tim Hortons. You know,
Yeah.
can we go in and not buy the coffee and still talk to them? And I said,
Right.
you probably can try it, see what happens. And in some cases they did. They didn't pay, but they had a great conversation. And in one case, I
Mm.
remember the student felt so guilty after it was over, they bought coffee. But
Oh my
it's
God.
really an interesting, it's if your staff doesn't know it, they don't know right from wrong.
Right.
And you can't, and here's another thing which I believe, you can't create a new set of values. You can't come along one day and say, our culture is terrible. We're going to create a new set of values. Remember what I said, when the values are ingrained and positive, they're passed on from generation to employee generation.
Yeah.
When leaders come in and say we're going to put new values in, it says to the employees who've been living them all these years, something's wrong with you. Something's changed. You don't fit here anymore. So right
Right.
away, you're pushing them back. What you need to do is come in and find out what were the values that made your organization great in the first place and
Yeah.
start to celebrate those, bring those back to life. And people will start to embrace those and celebrate them. That is not just my philosophy. When you look at the research at MIT, at Harvard, and other places, they say anywhere from 85 to 90% of culture change in organization fails within 18 months. Well, if it perpetually fails, Einstein said hitting your head against the wall and expecting the results to change is insanity. Well, it's kind of insanity to come in and say, we're going to change the culture, which means we have to change the values and expect people to get in line. I say, if you really want to change the culture because it's migrated away from what it originally was and it's not healthy right now, there's conflict, whatever. I said, do a back to the future exercise. Go back to the values that made you great, celebrate those, bring them back.
Yeah. What about accountability? How do you hold people accountable to values without micromanaging them or sounding moralistic?
Oh, J and J has that, with the credo. I mean, they do a credo day every year. They basically know what they're supposed to do. The employees know about it, and they again it becomes part of their DNA. They just do it. You don't have it becomes an intrinsic reward, not an extrinsic reward. I believe in it. It's part of what I believe in. Doing it is the right thing to do. I feel good about myself that I did it.
Mm,
That's exemplified in the 1980s with the Tylenol scare when there was cyanide in Chicago. They took the product off the market worldwide.
right.
They lost $100 million on the stock market. They had to stop selling the shares. 3 months later, they instituted the safety cap, reformulated it, reintroduced it, and the market share went up $600 million. Living in
Wow.
values made them a profit of $500 million. I mean,
Geez.
you can't beat that. So if you're going to live your values, and there's case study after case study of organizations that they live their values, they got the support of their employees, and their employees therefore delivered the service, the product successfully. It's an
Right.
intrinsic thing. It's not an extrinsic thing. By rewarding it, people just feel good about themselves, say thank you. I mean, how many times I've said to an executive, when's the last time you left your office, went out into a factory, wherever it is, heard about an employee who did something really outstanding, and you personally went over and thanked them?
Mm,
And I don't hear too many who do that. But when they
no.
do it, it's very powerful. Why did the CEO thank that person? Well, I want that same thank you. I want that recognition. I'll do the right thing.
Right. So then the hiring process, what role should values play in choosing who joins a team and who shouldn't?
Well, um, obviously, in my opinion, that's the bottom line. They can
Yeah.
have
So
all this.
someone comes in and they got to be living those values. It's
Yeah, if
got to be
they
inside of
right, they can have all the skill and knowledge in the world, but if they don't live the values, you don't know if they're going to behave correctly. And
them.
if they don't
Right.
live the values and they're put in a situation where people who do live the values, and then they argue with them about this is the right thing to do, this is my opinion, and the others who work there keep saying, no, these are the right values, this is the way you're supposed to behave, you create friction in the organization. And there's this whole, I believe, misunderstanding in the HR world in particular, not to hire for culture. Now, that's based on the idea that people hire for their own image. They hire, you know, people who look like them, people who come from the same background as them, went to the same school as them,
Right.
drive the same car as them. That's hiring in your own image. That's not hiring in
Hmm.
culture. Culture is
Right.
hiring for the values. You can find people from all over the world, all different educational backgrounds, that have the same values and same behaviors that express those values. Those people can argue to the blue in the face about different experiences they had and different perspectives they have. But at the end, they'll go off and have lunch together and be very happy and talk about whatever, because
Right.
they did it for the sake of the business. They didn't do it to prove a point. And
Right.
so people have to hire for values, and it's easier to hire for values and have that fit and teach the skill and knowledge. So
Mm,
my concern right now with this whole focus on hiring for skill and knowledge, it's got a scary opportunity to take us back to the 1950s and 60s, where we just hire somebody and do the job and not worry if they get along with anybody. So
right.
I think you have to hire for a minimum ability to do the job. They can
Oh my
grow in the
gosh.
job.
When you said that, I just imagined a workplace of people who are very skilled with like cubicles that have walls, like literally walls from floor to ceiling, because no one's going to want to talk to each other and everyone's going to be going crazy in their little cubicles.
Well, yeah, there's a good possibility that's going to happen with this
Scary.
whole push to skill and knowledge hiring. And I believe in that. You got to hire for somebody who can do the job. We were doing work with Thomas Cook, um, in the foreign where they do foreign exchange booths at airports and city centers, and
Okay.
in observing them over and over again and seeing what they do is they need to know math skills cold to do foreign exchange calculation if the computer goes down. And they don't look at money from a denomination point of view. They look at it from a color point of view. They know each denomination in different countries has a certain color. So they're very quick. So for them, what my recommendation was is in order to do the basic job, you can't be colorblind and you have to have a certain proficiency in math. So give
Mm,
a colorblind test and a math proficiency test. And if they can pass that, then go for the interview where you'll hire for the behaviors of the values and behaviors of the job.
yeah.
They were hiring people in two locations. One regional manager didn't like that approach, that she wanted to continue to do her other approach. And one regional manager wanted to do that approach. Both airport locations, both about the same size traffic. And they always traditionally hired 12. They all went to the same location to get training, and then they go back to their areas. Usually during the training, people drop out.
Mm.
And to the person who used the values approach, the behavior approach training, nobody dropped out. They all fit.
Wow.
She was overstaffed. She had to find a way of doing it. She did. She found a way of doing it. The one that did it, as tradition goes, lost members and just had enough. And in the course of a couple of months, she had to let two of them go. The ones where everybody stuck around, nobody was let go.
Hmm.
So it works and it really makes a difference.
What about on like for high performing teams? How do clear values reduce confusion and increase their speed? Does it actually help with productivity?
Yeah, like if they have choices to make, you're making a decision, you have two or three decisions to make, and you have in the final analysis or in the beginning, it depends when you want to do it, does this decision line up with our values? If the answer
Right.
is no, that decision's off the table.
Right. There's no thought. If
It,
you know your
it's a
values, you
it's
know what decision you have to make.
yeah, it's a no-brainer. And they're off the table. And as a result of that, things can move quickly and the person who proposed that resolution, when others show it's not consistent with the values or the purpose of the organization, they would kind of like shrug their shoulders and say, yeah, I didn't see it from that point of view and just move on. But if you have people
Right.
with different value sets that don't agree on how to behave or how to proceed, that person's going to continue to argue and that team's going to get slowed down.
Right. So they definitely help with the resolving of conflict as well.
Right. Or differences of opinion. Yes.
Mm. So this is an interesting question. What about when a company is trying to do a refresh, and so they want to restructure, they want to redo their values because something's not working out. What is one mistake that companies make when trying to refresh their values? Or perhaps you could talk to us about how companies can even go about doing this, because we just talked about how difficult it is to change the values in a company, but sometimes you have to. Sometimes something new comes in and things need to be changed in order to whatever it is. The world is changing so fast every day. How do you even approach this?
Well, here's my cut on that. Too many companies see a technology change as a value change,
Mm,
or a culture change. We are going to go to more AI, more electronics. We're going to change the culture to be more agile.
right,
But then I go back and I ask, does that mean you're not respectful anymore? Does that mean you're not this anymore or that anymore? Oh no, we're going to keep those. So what you're doing is you're changing the technology. You're changing the
mm,
processes. So people get confused when they say we're going to change our culture. And in reality, they're changing either their strategy or the way they're going to do business. I see innovation as a common value in organizations. But organizations are innovating all the time. They've always been innovating. That's a
right,
strategic approach. Customer service is a given. It's a strategic approach. Organization, well, we're going to change the culture. We're going to become more customer focused. Great. But how are you going to treat those customers? And that
right.
goes back to values that already exist. So I
Mm,
think in a lot of cases, people will misunderstand exactly what you're talking about as a need to change the culture instead of celebrate the culture and how the culture supports bringing in new technology, how the culture supports changing the focus of the business from the way we traditionally did it to innovation.
Right.
And so, those are the kinds of things. Now, with that, there might be something that needs to be added, and behavior does have to change. For instance, if you're going to an innovation approach and the company's not risk tolerant, well, you got to figure out what level of risk are you going to tolerate and create the behaviors that support that. But,
Right.
but that is a situational behavior, not a cultural behavior. So that's where, you know, and the best way of knowing what the values are, talk to your frontline staff that have
Mm.
been there a long time, and talk to your frontline staff that just joined and ask them what did they observe of those who've been there a long time. And not only will you get the values, you'll probably get a couple of good corporate legends out of it.
What about a myth? Is there a business value myth that you would like to retire today?
Yeah, there is one, not very popular.
Let's
But
hear
I
it.
believe one of the most popular values, and whenever I do the exercise on values, it always comes up. Integrity is a value.
Mm.
And then I ask them to define integrity. And when they define integrity, they also define their other values. And then I go back to when you were in elementary school and you were having a spelling bee and you had to define the word and then spell it. The teacher would tell you you can't use the word in the definition. You got to use it, explain the word, truly explain it, not use it to explain it. Well, you're defining integrity by using all the other words of your values.
Okay.
So you will have, and what's integrity? Integrity is doing what you say you're going to do. Integrity is how we act when nobody's looking.
Yeah.
Integrity is keeping our promise. Well, what's your promise? Your values. So you have integrity when you live your values at all times and in all situations. Because if
Right.
one of them you can excuse away, you're not living them all, therefore you don't have integrity. You're not keeping your promise. So one of the myths that I've been talking about for years, and people always push, oh, we got to use integrity. I say, yeah, use it as the preamble to your values. We will
Mm.
have integrity when we live our values in every situation at all times. But integrity is the sum total of living your values.
Right. It's almost like Captain Obvious. It's like you would hope that all businesses would have lead with integrity, right? Like it's kind of like the no-brainer. I agree with you.
Yeah, and there's another point to that, though. Not all company values are seen as positive by other people.
Say more and give us an example.
So if you say that um, uh, growth of your business is first, and that you do whatever you can to grow the business, and you truly believe that's the right way of behaving, and therefore you don't mind if people step over each other or there's high competition among employees. It's kind of the old J.R. Ewing kind of thing on Dallas, where you have the two brothers competing against each other.
Right.
Well, that was not a respectful company that was friendly to its employees, et cetera, but it was the right values for that organization.
Mm.
So there are organizations where there are values, there's an ingrained culture of doing things a certain way that are very successful for that organization. And some organizations will treat senior leaders differently. Like if you line up at the lunch line, if they ever go to lunch line, they get served first. Or
Hmm.
they have a separate kitchen which got tablecloths and China and silverware and everything else, but the other 10,000 employees are on their own. Uh,
Right.
you know that that's the culture of the organization. That's the values. We put our executives above everybody else. Therefore, do you want to work there? I had one organization in the telecommunication business that had that attitude that senior leaders were sort of above everybody else. They were untouchable. And as I began to work with the organization and realize that, I told the CHRO, here's your deposit back. I can't work here. I
Mm,
I can work just about anybody where, but when you're not, if you're saying you want to create values and your employees are talking about the values of respect and the values of teamwork, et cetera, but your leadership will never demonstrate it, I don't want to be involved in a failure.
right.
And I gave them names of other consulting firms that probably could help them out, but I just couldn't do it.
Yeah. You would be going against your own values.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about during the interview process? What is a question to ask in an interview to test alignment? Like, is there a specific way to go about it?
Yeah, there is. It's a you have to understand what the behavior you're looking for. So let's say the behavior you're looking for is they reach out to other people to help them when they see other people need help.
Mm,
That might be a behavior that's in one of the values. So you have to put a question together. But you can't say in the question that you help others when they need it because now you're telegraphing, you're saying to the person, regurgitate that back to me.
right.
So you're giving them the answer. So you got to word it carefully. Describe a
Mm,
time when you were working in a situation and realized progress wasn't being made.
mm,
Now, the person might say, "Well, I just took over from that person and I was the hero and I got it done," because that's what they did. And you're saying, "Thank you very much. We'll call you, don't call us."
right.
And or they might say, "Well, I approached the person and I said to them, 'Do you mind if I ask you a question? I see you're struggling.
Right.
What can I do to help you out?'" And the person says, "Well, I'm not really struggling, but I could use a little help." Or "Thank you, because I never get this done without help." And you go into how did they respond and what was the outcome and what feedback did they get. So here's the problem with behavioral questions. People will say, "Tell me about a time when you were working and the team wasn't making progress." That's a good question. And they ruin it with, "What did you do?" Or
Mm,
"How did you react?" Well, maybe they didn't react. Maybe they did nothing. But by
right.
asking, "What did you do? How did you react?" You're telling them to lead with an answer that says they did something that maybe they didn't do. So
Right.
it's a very simple process. What I do suggest, it's all explained in my latest book, Selecting the Best, Building a Workforce Driven by Values for Lasting Success. And it's all in there about the values, about hiring for values, how to write a solid behavioral question. There's 6 steps how to write it. It's all in the new book on
Mm,
selecting the best. So if anybody is really interested in doing it, and even if you're looking for a job, reading the book can help you understand the mindset of the person that's interviewing you. So you'll have an advantage. So the book is really for both the interviewer and the interviewee to give them a sense of what's the right way of getting the information to find if the person does live the values.
mm. I love that. And before we go today, the listeners were promised some concrete actions that they can do to turn values into behaviors. So, do you have a few quick tips for people that are like, interesting. How do I train my values into behaviors?
Well, it's how to identify the behaviors that define my values. I'll put it
Okay.
that way. And the way of doing that is asking the question, uh, critical incident interviewing is what it's called, of when you were in different situations, what steps did you take to resolve that? And then you decode that information from a number of people that have successfully done it and see what are the common actions that they took. So
Right.
one way of doing that is finding that. The other way is looking for those corporate legends. What are those
Mm,
events in the history of the organization that stand out as a challenge, a crossroads, and we got better because of it? What
right.
were the behaviors that were behind it? What were the actions that people took at that time? Another way of looking at it is when is the opposite side is why do those people that were asked to leave the organization, what were they doing that caused us to say they should leave?
Mm,
And you'll find there's usually a behavioral connection, not a skill and knowledge connection, but a behavioral question on why they weren't a team player. Well, what do you mean? Well, they always took credit for everything. They always did this. They stole other people's ideas. They whatever it might be.
right.
They didn't communicate well. They didn't share knowledge well. And you'll see from, well, what was the converse of what are people doing, therefore, that stay here? So ask those, do a review with managers who let people go. What were the things that caused you to want to let them go? So that's another way of collecting information.
Mm. So today we learned that values only matter when they're visible, measurable, and lived. And you need to use clarity, alignment, accountability, conversations, and hiring practices to really bridge the gap between what's written and what's actually real. Because there can be a huge difference in that. I've seen it so many times. I start working somewhere and I'm looking at the values and I'm looking around and I'm like, this is complete BS. It just doesn't make any sense. So to learn more from David Cohen and his work at DS Cohen and Associates, you can visit his website and it'll be linked in the show notes. David, do you have any other comments on this amazing topic that so many companies struggle with and some thrive and some don't? And do you have anything else to say on the topic?
I would say for people who are looking for a job, sometimes you are inclined just to take the first job you get offered, especially people that have recently graduated,
Yeah.
but do a values evaluation for yourself. And then when they come to the end of the interview and say, do you have any questions? Ask them a behavioral question. You look on the website and they say they value whatever, and ask them, tell me about a time when you had to make a decision between whatever it might be, and see if they can even know what their values are, or the answer matches what the value says on the website. Because if it doesn't, that's a red flag. And if they say, well, I don't know what our values are, that's a red flag because the hiring manager should know what the values are. The HR recruiter should know what the values are. And if they can't, you're going into a place which might not be the friendliest place for you to work.
Mm. Yeah, what a great conversation. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Yeah. And to our audience, please do not forget to like and subscribe. If you learned anything today, which I learned so much, please leave some comments in the show notes and make sure to visit David Cohen, and we will link his website down in the show notes so you have easy access to his tools and so you can learn more about his books and everything he does. Until next time, take care and live your values, you guys. Live your values. Until next time.